let us know what sorts of institutions that they represent, and then we'll move on shortly. Thank you. Welcome everybody who's just joined us. We're just taking off, and as we wait for other guests to log on, we've kindly requested you to fill in the poll which you're seeing on your screen. Great. So we have a very broad, diverse group that's joined us on today's call. And we have quite a few people from humanitarian agencies and NGOs. And we have representatives from FSPs, and this includes both traditional and non-traditional FSPs, like banks and MNOs. We have private sector, commercial institutions, government and public sector agencies who are a very critical partner in the work that we do. Funders, donors, and foundations, as well as academia and research. So we welcome you all to today's call. So my name is Diana. I am the communications specialist at FSD Uganda, and I'll be your moderator for today's call. As I'd mentioned to the participants who'd logged in a bit earlier, we are really going to delve into insights of the financial lives of refugees and how COVID-19 has affected financial service delivery to them. Now, I want to take this time to acknowledge the project team for the work that they have done to get us to this point, the work that continues to happen, even under these very difficult conditions. A few housekeeping notes that I'm going to make. The baseline report that we're going to delve into today should have been shared with you as a link in the invitation that you received. If you did not receive the baseline report, please feel free to drop an email to us at communications@fsduganda.or.ug, and we'd be more than happy to facilitate the same. We have opened the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we have reserved the last bit of this webinar to go over the questions that are coming in from our audience, so please feel free to use it. The webinar, of course, is being recorded and is going to be shared with everybody who had registered to participate in today's webinar. And finally, excuse me, as I mentioned earlier, the polls that are going to be going on throughout the presentation are intended to make this as interactive as possible for us. A quick look at the agenda. We'll start with an introduction and a project overview. Excuse me. We'll go into the baseline findings, and that section should last for about 30 minutes. We'll go into the impact of COVID on refugees, and we'll get to hear directly from some of our implementing partners who are facing some challenges and have found some works around them on the ground. And then finally, we'll have the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome my colleague from FSD Africa. That's Kuria Wanjau, who's the manager of forcibly displaced people at FSD Africa, and David Dakwa, who's the manager of competitive strategies at FSD Uganda. And from all our guests, FSD stands for Financial Sector Deepening. And we are members of a broader network of 9 similar institutions working across Africa. So, Kuria, over to you to take us through the project overview.
Thank you, Diana, and hello, everyone. Like Diana has mentioned, my name is Kuria Wanjau. I work with FSD Africa as the forcibly displaced people team manager. And this is actually a joint project between FSD Africa and FSD Uganda, and we are collaborating with BFA Global, who are supporting as our learning and research partner, as we support financial service providers to drive financial services to refugees but also the host communities around them. The project and the gist of this webinar today is to disseminate the results of a baseline study that BFA undertook. And part of the project will also have what we're calling financial diaries that will be looking at the livelihoods and financial coping mechanisms of refugees and host communities. And eventually we'll have an end line towards the end. And just looking at how they're building their livelihoods and managing their finances. Next slide, please. So FSD Africa is a specialized development agency working to build and strengthen financial markets across sub-Saharan Africa. We are fully funded by DFID, and our interest in refugees is driven by the challenge that most refugees are excluded from financial service delivery. And based on our studies, a lot of them are relying on informal financial services. The more traditional FSPs or financial service providers are still looking at the traditional clients. And so part of our package and our approach has been to conduct market assessments in the different geographies, just to show a case that indeed there's potential for refugees to be served by financial service providers. We also take the participants through a design sprint where they're able to design and prototype products that they're able to test with the refugee and the host community. After that, we invite applications to what we call an innovation competition, where private sector companies can apply for funding from us and our partners, so that they can pilot or develop the products that they have in mind further, and hopefully scale them up to the larger market. So the third component is what we support them through financial support and technical assistance. Currently, we have interventions in Rwanda in partnership with the AFR, which is the local FSD there, where we were working with the 3 partners. And in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, there we have done the market assessment, which is also available on our website. We ran the innovation competition, and we have selected 3 partners that will be engaging very soon. And then our latest one is on Nigeria, where we are currently identifying somebody to do a market assessment on the digitization of humanitarian and social cash assistance in Nigeria. And for purposes of Uganda, I'll leave it to David, who I invite to take us through what we are doing in Uganda.
Thank you very much, Kuria. So just before I give the broad overview, maybe the key objectives of what the FI4R project is, just a bit about FSD Uganda. We are an independent think and do tank that is committed to achieving a deeper and broader and more inclusive financial sector with a special emphasis on low-income individuals and businesses. We support innovation, we conduct research, and then support regulatory processes that shape the financial sector. We are also funded by the UK government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And as you heard earlier on, we're also part of a network of 9 other FSDs working across sub-Saharan Africa. So the broad objectives of the FI4R, which is a financial inclusion for refugees project in Uganda, is mainly threefold. Firstly, we commenced this journey to demonstrate refugees as an economically viable market for the financial service provider community through a combination of technical assistance and grants that we offered to 3 FSPs, 3 financial service providers, to pilot tailored financial products for the refugee and host community. So these products were designed in response to a number of key market failures we observed within the markets a few years back. So they basically ranged from on the supply side, we saw very low risk appetite and very limited appreciation of the commercial benefits of refugees. On the demand side, we saw a very high reliance of informal financial services, which by themselves are not bad, but basically lack the ability to respond to the increasing capital demands of refugees and businesses of host community dwellers. And then on the policy side, there really was a lot, not too many rules and incentives around the refugee community with regards to policies around terrorist financing and AML. There was a very high risk perception of refugees in this regard. So aside basically the communication of this group as an economically viable market, we wanted to use this intervention, this 2-year intervention, to affect this very demographic, to reduce the vulnerability of up to 40,000 low-income refugees and hosts. That is actually the number we are targeting through this intervention. And then finally, like my colleague at FSD Africa Korea shared, to see how we could apply some of the learnings in the other jurisdictions where we have presence. So see how we can replicate learnings in Rwanda and even in Nigeria and other sub-Saharan territories. So I want to briefly touch on the partnerships that characterize this multi-year intervention. So like we mentioned earlier on, we are doing this a joint initiative between FSD Uganda and FSD Africa. A very important partner is also BFA Global, who is our learning and our research partner for the entire year, for the entire 2 years. They will be working this journey with us, and they will be conducting key studies, baseline, endline studies. They would also be conducting focused financial diaries with the refugee community to understand their financial lives, to understand what their incomes and expenditure patterns look like. And so this brings me to the implementing partners, who are the 3 main financial service providers we are working with in this project. That is VisionFund, Equity Bank, and Rural Finance Initiative. Now with Equity Bank is working in Naki Valley and is working with humanitarian aid agencies to provide refugees with fully fledged savings accounts to receive incoming cash transfers. And they're also going to pilot an innovative credit product for agents and merchants. VisionFund and RUFI are both working with savings groups in the West Nile region, and they have savings groups as their anchor, and throughout this project, they would be catalyzing an increase in their collective funds by infusing capital to these groups based on their debt capacity and digital credit scores. So all 3 are working with us together with BFA for the next 1.5 years. And we are very, very hopeful of all the rich data that will come out of this. I would, at this point, hand over to Diana to take us to the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, David. Without further ado, we're now going to delve into what really is the core of today's presentation. And I'm going to hand you over to my colleague from BFA Global, Anne Gashoka, who's a qualitative researcher with BFA and who is going to take us through details of what the team found on the ground and take us through the findings of the baseline study. So Anne, you're welcome.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much, Diana. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry, if you could continue sharing your screen, Diana, please. Seems I need to update my computer from my end. Great. Thank you, Diana, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon to all present today. I'll start by introducing BFA. BFA Global is a research advisory, data analytics, and product innovation firm focused on the intersection of finance, data, and technology. We work with the world's leading innovators, development organizations, policymakers, financial institutions, and more to help them build solutions that can contribute to more sustainable and inclusive economies. Next slide, please. So why we undertook this baseline survey is because we had two objectives. Objective number one was to provide the financial service providers who are the implementing partners that my colleague has taken you through, for them to be able to have relevant customer base details for the customers that they are targeting. The next objective, we wanted to provide the stakeholders of a few in-depth surveys that covers financial tools, as well as income, expenditure, and physical asset of the diverse set of the refugees. Next slide, please. So we had a total sample of 155 people that we spoke to. Out of the total sample, 127 were refugees and 28 were from the host communities. We also went to 4 different areas, namely Nakivale settlements, Bidibidi, Kampala, and Palorinya. So when we were conducting this survey, we implemented the data, the methodology being face-to-face. It was a very detailed survey lasting 1 hour. So we had so many questions that we asked all our respondents. Next slide, please. So these are some of the characteristics of the people that we spoke with. Mostly were women. We had 62% of women being in our sample. And then when it came to the household size, on average, the households that we spoke to, they had 6 people. But that is not saying that the rest, like we can see, for example, clearly in here that like in Bidibidi, they had 8 members in the household. Some of these members of the household were biological children and some of them were non-biological. Actually, this was one of the factors that we saw overall, that most families were living with some of the children who were not their biological children, and therefore some of these household sizes were bigger. So again, we saw like 70% of our respondents were married. Also, it didn't mean that all of them were living together in Uganda. We found some, like for example, the wife was living in the settlement camp, while else the husband was still in their home countries. Then we saw when it came to education, at least 35% of refugees had secondary education when we compared that to the host community. Next slide, please. So before I delve further on the income, expenses, and also the financial instruments, I would like to run a poll. We want for you to respond, like how much do you think like the refugees were earning on a monthly basis when it comes to income? If you could just take a second to answer our poll. So we can see the results coming in. That's great. We can see most of you answered like they were earning a monthly median income of less than 40 USD. Great. So let's see if that's the case. Next slide, please. So we have a map here on the places that I mentioned that we did conduct our baseline survey. And from this map, we can be able to see the median monthly income. Just to mention a few, maybe like if we could look at Kampala, we can see their monthly median income was 56 USD. And when we look, for example, at Nakivale, we can be able to see that their monthly median income was 52%. So I think overall what we found out, most refugees were earning a median income of about 44 USD overall in all these other places. I'll take you to the next slide, whereby I'll discuss about various different sources of income that refugees were involving themselves in, so that you can be able to see how we were able to come up with these amounts. Next slide, please. So these are the different sources of income that the refugees were involving themselves in. Non-employment income was and is still the primary source of income for most refugees, whereas for the host community is agricultural income. So we can be able to see at least refugees were earning higher income compared to the host communities. And this is because when we talk about non-employment income, this means that the refugees were receiving food ratio from, for example, WFP, and also they were getting cash transfers, again, from different organizations. And also most of them had an advantage of having remittances from some of their relatives and friends who have been repatriated in different countries. So from this graph here, we could easily be able to see like the regular income, for example, stood at 88 USD. But when we look back and look at the refugees and where, like they came from their host communities, a majority of them were employed, they had regular jobs, but that changed when they came to Uganda. Most of them now ended up starting or, forming a way out so that they can continue earning an income, and majority of them started, like doing self-employment income. When we talk about self-employment income, they set up small businesses whereby maybe some of them would sell like vegetables, some of them would have shops whereby they were selling like the basic commodities like salt and sugar. And we can, like clearly see that in a way, when most of them ended up doing self-employment, they did not have so many barriers along the way because it did not require them a lot of capital to start some of these businesses. So most of them ended up being in that pool. Then from time to time, some of them could end up getting temporary contractual employment, especially from the NGOs, which were based within some of the settlement camp. And as I had mentioned earlier, remittances, when it came to refugee, was also boosting them in terms of them earning more than the host community, at $11. I'll take you to the next slide, whereby we just want to showcase a case study for one of the refugees and how he was able to climb the income ladder from being a farmer from his own home country, and also when he came to Uganda, to him being self-employed and then eventually ending up at a regular job. So what we saw overall, like most of them, if they ended up landing a regular job, they started doing much way better than when they were involving themselves in these other sources of income. So John came about 12 years ago from his home country, which was DRC Congo, when the violence erupted. And when he was in Congo, he was a farmer, but what he was earning was not sufficient to sustain his family. So even when the violence just erupted, he also lost some of the livestock that he had. So once he got into the camp, he started farming, which was not doing very well. Again, he did not earn a lot of money, and he saw an opportunity of him venturing into a small business. So he bought a second-hand motorcycle from a friend at about $407 USD, and started becoming, like a rider, motorbike rider, ferrying people in and out of the camp. So he did that for some time, and he was able to earn about $3 per day when he was doing this kind of work, but eventually he got into an accident and he hurt his wrist. This meant that he could not be able to continue doing this type of job, and eventually he had to sell his motorbike at 272 USD, which was a slightly lower amount than the way he had bought it. So he landed a regular job at one of the, one of the MTN shops around within the settlement camp as a cleaner. And when he earned this, because it was a regular job, he was able to get about 79 USD per month, and it was being paid through a formal financial provider, which is Centenary Bank. But because there were deductions along the way, he ended up taking home about 69 USD. But as you look at his story and what he used to earn before, and now what he's earning, he is in a better position and a better place. So most of the refugees that we spoke to, they told us very similar stories to that. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit about the expenses. So these are some of the expenses that the refugees were earning on a daily. These are some of the regular expenses that the refugees were spending on a daily basis. That's why we are terming them as regular expenses. I think one of the interesting bits that we were able to find out when we were doing this exercise is like charcoal was the highest regular expense by far from the refugees. So if we look at the key, we can see the red one being the charcoal, and it stood at, it's at 11 USD. That's the amount that they were spending on a monthly basis. So what we have is a medium in each of these. We can see they also had other expenses like soap, salt, maybe hair and charcoal, but it's soap, it's mostly the charcoal and also the cooking oil that stood out, that most of them were spending their expenses onto that. When we look overall at the monthly expenditure that they were spending, it was coming to 18 USD. So if you compare what they were spending on a monthly basis, being 18 USD and charcoal was taking 11%, you can clearly be able to see that charcoal was almost taking 3/4 in terms of the expenditure that they were spending on a monthly. Next slide, please. Here we are going to talk a little bit about the food expenses that they were also spending a lot of money on. We can see clearly like the highest was maize, and especially on the, on the refugee side. So host community, as we had mentioned earlier, most of them were participating into agricultural activities, and therefore it meant like maybe things like maize, and if even we could check clearly, you can see vegetables, they were not spending a lot of money because they were able to get the food out of their garden and consume them. But we could see like, refugees ended up spending a lot of money on that. But again, the interesting bit is when we look at the meat, most of them were spending about $3 to $4 on meat on a monthly basis. What I want to mention is like, these are not the only expenses that they had. Overall, they had so many other expenses like rent, school fees, which is not here because that was not considered as a regular, like expense, because probably they were happening on a monthly basis. So what we are looking at is the expenses which were happening on a daily and weekly basis. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Next slide, please. So here we also were able to ask them about, some of the needs that they had, and refugees reported that they celebrated cultural and religious festivities, foregoing other expenses. I'll just mention, especially like South Sudanese nationality, we had that if in case there was a death within, like the settlement, they had to transport the person who had died back to their home countries. So this meant that they had to, to spend a lot of money in terms of making those arrangements. And we can clearly see even from, the key below there that they ended up spending about, 15 or 16 USD on that particular, festivities. So they forego other things like maybe even, needing a doctor and sometimes needing a medicine so that they could be able to actualize that. So this was also like a very important activity in their lives, and they felt they were obligated to be able to go ahead and spend that money onto that. Next slide, please. So before I move on to the next section about our financial instruments used by the refugees, we'll just like to run a poll so that you can tell us what you think is the most common type of financial instrument used by refugees. If you could take 30 seconds for that. Great, we can see your responses coming in. I can see most of you have mentioned savings group being the most common type of financial instrument used. Let's see if that's the case. Next slide, please. Great, so on this particular slide, we can be able to see like refugees are mostly the same as the host community when it comes to different financial instruments that they use, but we can see most of them picked up mobile money and ASCAs. So these are the savings groups, but not banks or SACCO. So probably if I could speak a little bit about what is happening in here in this particular graph, we could be able to see, for example, for the groups, refugees who are spending about $6 in terms of paying their contributions into the ASCA. The most amazing thing is like we found out that because these were the same savings group, but like most of them were having in their home countries, it was very easier for them when they came, to Uganda to start them off because it's something that they had knowledge of. And that's why we are saying they picked up like mobile money, because most of them, when we looked, when they came from their home countries, they did not own mobile phones. They did not know mostly about the mobile money, but they ended up picking that. So quite interesting on this graph, we can see when it comes to us as the savings group in Kampala, not so many people were in these groups. Probably it's because, most of the financial services providers concentrated in those areas, they are not actually advocating for it when we compared that to the refugees who are in the settlement camps. As we have mentioned, we have the implementing partners who are implementing some of these products. So they are able, to encourage or even to advertise their products to the refugees so that they can take them up. Again, one thing we saw that was quite eye-catchy was the banks and the SACCO. We saw that most, people were not leaving a very big, balance into their accounts. And the assumption, when you compared that to the amount, the savings they're keeping in the house, which is about $9, you could be able to clearly see that, the assumption that is out there is like most refugees, probably they have not reached that point in having faith when it comes to formal financial services. So probably a lot has to be done for them to be able to transfer this amount from their, savings pocket into the house to bring that amount into the bank and the SACCOs. So we also again had over and over, most of the time, that there were thefts, which were, ongoing within the communities. But again, that did not hinder them from still keeping this money at home. So probably that's also an area to be looked out. We also saw they were using other financial instruments, like for those who had businesses, they were giving out credit to some of their customers, just to have that good continuity when it comes to business. But it was not such a big balance, it was a small balance. Next slide, please. Also, we are going to run another poll before we talk about the cell phone within the refugees. So if you could take 30 seconds maybe to answer that. What percentage of refugees do you think they own phones? Great. I can see majority have responded that 31%. I think 31% of refugees own phones. So great. Let's see if that's the case. So yeah, we can see like 71% of refugees have cell phones. and they have different types of cell phones. We see 43% of them having basic phones, and majority of refugees when it comes to gender is male who owns these phones. Then when it comes to the feature phone, we see 20% of the refugees have the feature phone. There we see women are leading at 22% owning the feature phones. Then lastly, we can see 27% of refugees own a smartphone. Again, we can see women leading, having 29% of this. So we also went ahead and asked them, how do they charge these different types of phones that they have? So 33% of them mentioned that they have electricity at home or at their businesses, and that's where they charge. Again, we see because there's, there's an idea like maybe because women are mostly at home, or maybe they're tending to their businesses whereby they have electricity. So we see a big percentage of women charging their phones from home. And when we look at charge at a shop, so charge at a shop is a place maybe where one could take a phone to be charged for them at a fee. We can see again there, men being at 30%, where they were taking the phones to charge at a shop. Again, there's an assumption maybe it's because they have to go out and work, and probably that's where they end up charging their phones at a charge shop. Great. Let's move to the next slide, please. So we want also to just to take our time and also talk a little bit about the IDs. So we saw overall 93% of refugees, they owned some type of ID, 40% having more than one ID. So the different types of IDs that we found out that the refugees owned, there was one registration at a family attestation. That was the highest one. Then the second one was the refugee ID. And the third one was a national ID. When we say the national ID, it didn't mean that it was a Ugandan national ID. It was mostly from their home country. However, even when, they were having these different type of identifications, some of them reported to have, to feel like this type of ID limited them in one way or the other. For example, for those people who had a family attestation card, they said that, that 1% reported to have limits movement when they wanted to move, inside and out of the settlement camps that they were in. They said this particular, type of identification limited them. For those who had refugees ID, they said, 30% reported to have, limits when it came to employment opportunities, either from, the NGOs or any other person who would have wanted to employ them. They said, as far as, they were able to produce their refugee ID as a form of identification, they were denied the opportunity. Then the last but not the least, they mentioned that for those who had the national ID from their home countries, 40% of them, they said they could easily be tracked back from their home countries by people probably who did not mean well to them. So they felt a little bit scared of even keeping this form of identification with them. Next slide, please. So we also took time and just drew some gender lenses, and we wanted to get, to know more about the women, especially because we saw 62% of, our respondents were women. So we ended up, just thinking through and looking through the data, and we were able to come with some of these findings. So 28% of the women we spoke to at least had, secondary school education. Most of them were 37, averagely on age, and they came with some cash. So we saw when women came in from their home countries, they had less resources when we compared that to men. But again, overall, they have gained much more. And we can see that before they came with about 12 USD. By the time we were conducting this baseline survey, most of them had about 35 USD in terms of earnings. Then employment, 55% of them came, the ones who came from their home countries, they were employed, but now we can see that has changed to 82%. Again, we can see before they came to the settlement camps, 27% of them were the only ones who were banked, and now we can see that stands at 34%. And again, when it comes to cell phone, only a few of them at 39% came with cell phones, and now we can see that at 60%, which was quite interesting to look at. So I'll also tell you a little bit story of one of the women that we interviewed within the camp and how they have been able, to quickly adjust and to improve when it comes to their earnings at the moment. So for example, Victoria came about, 4 or 5 years ago from South Sudan. So when she came to the camp, at least, she came with a double dose of very, important experiences. First of all, she had grown in a rural area back into South Sudan. So that meant she had, the know-how of constructing or building a house. So when she came to the camp, that was very easy for her to be able to do that. Secondly, she was employed as a restaurant manager, and that had built her confidence, and she knew how to engage into business. So when she came with only a small phone and with 2 cooking pots. But when UNHCR was able to provide her with pots, she saw an opportunity of selling those 2 pots because she had, at least an idea of how to run a business, and started a business. This was a small business of selling sugar and salt, but she has improved overall. She keeps on adding things that she's selling. So, she started selling charcoal, which we mentioned, it was one of the fastest moving commodity when it came to people spending money on expenses. And then she eventually also bought 5 goats. Though some died by the time we were just doing the interview, and she also has some few chicken. So from this story of Victoria, can be able to show resilience and how they are, they are easily adaptable and they're able to move on very fast. So Victoria currently belongs to 2 savings groups, and from within those 2 savings groups, they have been able to take a loan as a group, and they bought a grinding mill. So she's a part owner of the grinding mill, and therefore whenever, they get little revenue from the business, they're able to subdivide amongst themselves. So we just wanted to showcase how, some person like Victoria was able to come and adapt very easily, and she's actually doing very well within the camp. So thank you so much. So I'll hand the mic to my colleague, Michelle, so that she can take you to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for the presentation. So in this section, we're going to talk about what the impact has been of COVID-19 among refugees and also host community. I think, as most of you know, Uganda had the first case of COVID-19 in March, but they became quickly proactive in terms of reducing community transmissions. So some of the things they did was kind of reduce or close schools. They banned public gatherings. They stopped all flights coming in and out of Uganda, and also public transport was suspended. And also in terms of restrictions on the number of people per vehicle was also impacted. Right now, I think this actually has a good impact, because right now there are only about 2,362 cases in Uganda. So what has been the impact of COVID-19? The first thing that we noticed, and this is a discussion we've been having with the implementing partners since they have been the ones on the ground, is one, face-to-face meetings has been really hard to do. And this is especially because of 2 things. One, travel restrictions. So for example, when Palarinya settlement is about an hour drive from Moyo, and one of our implementing partners are based in Moyo, so they were not able actually to travel to the field to actually support them in field of savings group meetings. As you can see in the photograph, we actually have one savings group meeting, and they used to attend that, but that was impacted. Second, because of a social restriction, you're not able actually to meet up. The other thing we kept on hearing is about the security of the group box. So 2 of our implementing partners are supporting savings groups who actually use savings box. So in a situation where the social gathering is disrupted, it means the savings group or the group box is being held by one person. So most of the time, it was either the chairman or the treasurer, but that meant that it's going to be in the house. So people used to come and deposit money there as compared to having a group meeting where they save all the money and then distribute. But because now they were not able to actually disperse loans, they had to go to the chairman's house, deposit money, and that kind of created a lot of more money in the savings group. And that helped like understanding of terms of how do you protect and secure the group box. So the kind of fears from the savings groups we kept on hearing is like, how do I keep the group box safe? Because somebody knows I have the box, they can come in and steal from it. I guess the biggest thing as well for savings group is the disrupted group meetings. Especially the case where even when they had stopped, they'd actually started opening up and saying you can have group meetings. It was only allowed up to 5 people. Most savings groups have about 25 to 30 group members. So how do you deal with that? You're not able actually to hold and conduct group meetings. On average, I think they're supposed to meet every week, and that was clearly disrupted because of COVID. The other thing also we kept on hearing from the partners was groups wanted to actually do loan rescheduling, or also individuals, but it was easier to do a loan reschedule for individuals as compared to groups, because that's easier for like an MFI or a bank to actually talk to an individual and say, let's agree, we're going to extend our extension period for about 2 or 3 months. But in a group, you actually have to get the go ahead for 25 and 30 members. How do you do that when they're not able to actually to meet? So it was a really big challenge for our partner, even though they really wanted to do loan rescheduling, they couldn't have all the group members say yes, just because they're not able to actually sit in a group meeting. And also loan repayments was a big impact. During this time, there were 2 things that happened. One, WFP reduced in aid fund by 30%, but also because of lack of transportation and travel restrictions, most of the refugees were not able to actually conduct their businesses. That held up like kind of reduced income. So made it difficult for refugees, also host community, to start repaying their loans, because where do you get the income or the money to be able to do that? In our discussion with the implementing partners, 2 key things for us came out as the biggest challenges for them. Next slide, please. One was agent liquidity was a big concern. In most of both the refugee camps and the hosts, they noticed that there were actually more withdrawals than deposits. I think people like, I need to actually keep money, I'm being sent for money, let me withdraw the money that I have. And that created a liquidity problem. And also because of travel restrictions, it was very difficult for agents to move from the camps to the nearest town to actually get e-float. So even though we were trying to encourage people to do digitization or actually use mobile money, this became a big challenge, because where are they going to actually have mobile money if the agent doesn't have the money? But also we saw from like the equity agent, we saw that there was a need to move to contactless. So currently they were actually doing biometric verification. So an agent or a respondent will actually come in at the shop, as you can see in the photo, come and actually use their thumb to identify themselves. But now because of trying to actually move and become contactless, Equity Bank has decided to actually move them to more debit card, so then you have more say in this. And I can let Yangi actually talk more about, please go back. Yangi from Rural Finance to talk about how agent liquidity was a big concern for them. Yangi? I think you're on mute, Yangi.
Yeah. Well, afternoon and morning to all of you. I said my name is Yangi Lokule, and I'm the CEO of Rural Finance Initiative. Just a brief on RUFI. A Rural Finance Initiative is a cross-border MFI operating in both Uganda and South Sudan. And in Uganda, we have about 3,200 clients, of whom 68% are refugees in the main refugee settlements in the northwest, the western side of northern side of Uganda. That is the Koboko, Adjumani, and the Alorenya. Well, about what we do basically is lending to refugees. We also do agent banking, mobile money, and the saving groups that have been talked about. And a bit about the urgent liquidity challenges we faced during COVID. The main one, of course, is what she has mentioned, which was there were more withdrawals than deposit. Because around this time, basically, everybody was trying to have as much money as possible as cash on him or her. So you found out that as agents of Centenary Bank, there was a high demand from the clients of Centenary. And added to that was also the fact that NGOs in the camps, especially Palorinya, were paying their staff through mobile money or at the account. So you found out that it really put a lot of challenge on us trying to service the need for cash. Of course, added to that is also what she raised, which is the movement of cash. Because what we realized was it needed us to be able to move, example, from Palorinya to Centenary Bank to get money. And usually when we talk to the people concerned, they will even tell you, you need to have maybe a police escort, or we use even other vehicles that don't belong to us. So we realized that was more challenging because we'll actually be exposing ourselves. Almost everybody will know that RUFI has brought in money. So we had to devise other means other than relying on the ones that were suggested by the authorities that were with us. Thirdly, we also had challenges on lending liquidity, which came in after lifting a bit of the restrictions on COVID. And that was around April or May. It was a bit more about withdrawals. But from June onwards, issues of liquidity started coming in because now the demand for loans started increasing, and we had to make sure that we moved in more cash, especially from now onwards. Of course, urgent banking is online. So I think, as you may know, most of the refugee settlements are not within town. So there was a problem of internet connectivity, especially in Palorinya, where at times you find out that internet will be very stable for just about 5 hours, maybe from 10 in the morning up to around 2, up to around 1. After that, it's a struggle. So you found now that we transact less than actually what we thought we could do. Related to liquidity was the problem of cybercrime. And actually, I think those who are in cybercrime realized that a lot of people were trying to do things online. And then they started sending them bogus messages about being sent mobile money. And actually 6 cases, we registered 6 cases of people who are coming in trying to pay off the bogus transfer, until we dug further and we realized this was not something that was really true. So we realized an increase in this, and we actually started trying to sensitize our clients that whenever you get a message about mobile money, be careful. If there's not somebody who knows you, and especially somebody calls you back and says, let's divide this, send me this balance, then you take this one. So at least somehow after we sensitized them, then we realized that a bit of the cyber crimes were reducing. So that's just a bit about the liquidity challenges we faced during COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yangi. The other challenge or need we saw was the need for digitization. Next slide. Yeah, and because as Yangi said, a lot of NGOs and everything wanted to move now to the online and using mobile money. How are you going to go about it, especially in a settlement or in an area where they were so used either having in kind and cash? Some of the things you've seen during also this period, WFP has recruited more households to the cash transfer program with Equity Bank, with more than additional 20,000 households being enrolled. Also, from Equity Bank, we've seen the need for actually enrolling households to mobile banking and to just avoid contact transactions. Other thing also, we've seen more and more people saying, okay, how can I partner with banks or with other MFIs to able to transform what they used to provide as cash into digital? And not just only mobile money, but also just thinking about if they're able to have a bank account, are you able to get more from it? And what we've seen from all our implementing partners, they're also trying to move to complete full digitization, either by using mobile money payments, but also trying to get rid of manual processes and paper, like when they're doing risk assessment for new people. To actually talk more about this, I want to invite Nathan from Equity Bank to say what they've seen during this period in terms of the need for digitization.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan from Equity Bank Uganda. I run with the Financial Inclusion for Refugees project, and we appreciate the support from financial sector, financial sector deepening Africa and financial sector deepening Uganda for the support they have given us to be able to run with this program. Mine is to present. I don't have a presentation, but I'll quickly go through the COVID challenges. And as there are challenges, there are also some takeaways that we got from this crisis. One, when the crisis started, everything came to a stop, and personally I traveled from Kampala to Nairobi thinking that the world has come to a stop, but partners came knocking saying, well, we require more banking services, we need to pay more people using cash, doing kind support or assistance is no longer feasible, can you come and help? We had to do justification to our management. Luckily, the management understands that the approach and the mission of this program, so they were supportive. They approved the bank to participate in enrollment of new beneficiaries during the COVID crisis. Actually, we had even to go up to the level of the minister of in OPM, the Minister for Refugees and the Minister for Works, to be able to get travel permits for our staff to be able to access the settlements. So we had to train staff. It was very early in the crisis, so majority of staff were still 50-50 on how to protect themselves, what should be done. We had to motivate them more to ensure that they agreed to be in the settlement, or our 37 staff agreed to participate. At the same time, we were to provide them with PPEs and risk allowances to ensure that they are safe. Some of the effects, one of them, the social distance requirement or the guideline to do social distance. During enrollment, the space requirement and the resources people required had to increase because you have to stay apart, stationary, not stationary, but furniture. We had to have more furniture, more tents, more space. The other is we normally issue biometric cards. You all know not all refugees are able to secure a PIN. So what we did is we normally give biometric cards. So the mode of authentication is biometric, but now with the requirement for social distancing, we had to only issue debit cards with PIN. It comes with its own challenges, but we have also seen very unique lessons from refugees on how they memorize their PINs and how they are able to keep their PINs. And it has become necessary. In some families, 4 members would each remember one number. It was very exciting, where a refugee comes with 4 members, where each of them has their own number. They know the whole number, but each one is a custodian of one of the numbers, so that if I don't have the whole number, and if I forget, somebody else can remember which number was mine. It was very exciting. So we have had challenges, yes, of forgetting PINs. And as you wear a debit card, when you forget PINs, you have to do replacement. It comes with a cost. So that is a challenge. When it comes to the payments, we had to increase the days of disbursement. We normally do, during the normal times, we used to do 5 days disbursement over 20,000 beneficiaries. But currently we are doing 21 days. So that we ensure we spread the payments. We only credit very few beneficiaries that are able to be handled by agents without having a queue. This resolved liquidity challenges. So it's a takeaway that we should also report. We do not have liquidity challenges because the number of people coming for cash out are less, as it also reduces the queues and it reduces congestion at agent location. So social distance or maybe requirement that you don't have many people comes with its own advantages. So agents do not have to go around looking for cash because the number of people being credited every day are fewer. We received partners' guidelines on how to, of course, protect the beneficiaries, our staff, so we and our agents. So we had wash-hard points at enrollment locations, wash-hard points at every agent location. We had to sanitize the devices because for those who already have biometric cards, they have to touch the device. So it has to be sanitized every time. And I saw even beneficiaries saying, I want to sanitize it myself before I use. So it becomes very accommodative when somebody says, let me sanitize it myself before I am served. Then we also had an issue of bring your own pen, because as you are aware, as you collect money from an agent, you need to acknowledge with a signature or a thumbprint. For those who sign, we ask them to bring a pen to avoid the sharing of the pen. There was contention between us and our partners about signing, and they were asking whether we can drop. But when we looked at the risks around it, we said signing will continue. It's only that we'll have to ensure the pens are sanitized, and please bring your own pen so that you don't sign or you don't share a pen. The takeaways, maybe I would say, is we have seen increased numbers over COVID. Particularly WFP has upscaled by 20,000 beneficiaries from April to date. This is more business for us, so we can't fail to acknowledge that the crisis has come with a bit of some advantages to us. During this period, there wasn't much business, and the bank sat down and decided to carry out what can be done despite the crisis. And we realized we have so many customers who are not digitized. This is not only refugees, but our global customers across the country. So we embarked on a digitization project, and specifically now for the project, we started doing digitization and registering for mobile banking. And this mobile banking is you have to have a mobile number that you own and operate, and we register you and you are able to access. It solved one of the major challenges you have always had of card replacement. So if a beneficiary has Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes, Nathan, we can hear you. We have another 1 minute to wrap up the session.
Yes, we can hear you, Nathan.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us, Nathan?
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Nathan, can you hear us?
To have lost.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we have about 1 minute for you to finalize.
Okay. So we have embarked on mobile banking, and beneficiaries can now access their bank accounts using a bank card or a debit card or their mobile phones. The other thing is cashless payments. We have recruited 35 merchants in Akibale to drive cashless payments. And this was done during the COVID period. And our agenda is to drive as many of these beneficiaries to do cashless payments rather than withdrawing cash. Finally, we have more partners on board. Before COVID, we had WFP and UNHCR. And over COVID period, we have onboarded NRC, Norwegian Refugee Council. And this week, Danish Refugee Council has also come on board, and we appreciate their interest and the support they are also giving the bank. Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't have a presentation, but I hope my presentation is satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Also, for our last partner, VisionFund, they also did a survey to understand the impact of COVID-19 on refugee savings group. So for the next 10 minutes, Martina will take you through from the participant side and the respondent side. Martina, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. So thank you, FSDU and FSDA, for the invite for this webinar. Thank you, partners, for what you've shared so far, all of which I can absolutely agree with. My name is Martina. I'm the project manager for this financial inclusion project. And allow me to swiftly go through the general info that VisionFund Uganda, as partner of this project, together with Equity and RUFI, we work in West Nile, so in the north of Uganda, with branches currently in Moyo and Yumbe, and field offices to come in Arua and Adjumani. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. We provide credit to savings groups, which we have mentioned. So this is important for our survey and what we wanted to find out, because we give the credit straight into the cash box, so not the individual. And then the group decides, following their savings group's procedures, on the loan amount to each member. That means that our assessment, as we're not assessing the individual, we're very much relying on the strength of the group. And that comes with regular meetings, their internal record keeping, and adhering to the group procedures. So when I say regular meetings, I think it already dawns on you a bit with what comes next. Next slide, please. The COVID hit, so obviously from March onwards, we faced significant problems and challenges. So that was obviously in terms of repayments. As I mentioned, the whole group is responsible to pay back. And before COVID, we had a repayment rate of 100%, meaning the portfolio at risk, what you have here, was 0, meaning we got back everything and on time. And that moved up to a staggering 30%, which is, really bad. At the same time, which was already mentioned, there was a cut in food rations, where we found out that was part of the income selling those food rations of especially refugee households. So there was a significant loss of income from that as well, in addition to COVID. So we asked ourselves, given that we rely on those group meetings, because that's our business model with the savings groups, and that's not possible anymore, what do we do? And can we quickly go and ask groups, what will happen, what they see will happen, and what's currently happening? So that was in March and April. And maybe a comment on a survey, is it even possible in that during that time? And we thought yes, because it's digital. We have a tool where we register the answers on an online survey, but also our staff, we had hired our staff from refugee settlements and host communities. So there was no travel, and we didn't have to transport anybody anywhere because they were already in the community. So it was easier to ensure their safety with the no need to travel or movements, with the masks and the sanitizers and such. So we had, let's say we were lucky enough during that time that we had staff on the ground who could do that. And then just a caveat, please, because I'm realizing presenting after BFA, we're not a research organization. So the whole survey results, were really a quick, please, let's go answers, and not this is sophisticated academic research. So, my apologies for that, but we are a financial institution. Next slide. So when group meetings became a problem, as I mentioned, we did this survey on the impact of COVID on refugee and host community savings groups. We did that survey between end of April and May. As you can see here, we surveyed 417 individuals, and that was across Moyo, Obongi, and Yumba, including the settlements of Palurinya and Bidibidi. And as I said, please forgive us, just a quick and dirty question and answer analysis of that. So to this survey itself, and allow me a quick sneak peek on the context. We found out that there was an increase in staple food prices. You can see an overwhelming 88%, so that was pretty clear. We asked the groups, if they had to sell assets. At that point, and again, maybe I want to highlight this was April, May, the overwhelming answer was no. Allow me an unsustained personal claim that I think, would we ask that again now? I think that would shift a bit. And has the income changed? So for the individual and for in the group, and obviously you see here that there's big reduction because of COVID of the household income, including some that have completely lost the income or it has stopped, and a small percentage where it has increased. We had one of such examples when you think, face masks, and there were tailors and they could now sell face masks or, sell soap, hand sanitizers and such. That went obviously better. Next slide, please. So specifically now looking at the group behavior, because that is what we needed, is, as already mentioned, there's 25 to 30 people not allowed to meet anymore. And those meetings Nathan, I think you're not on mute, sorry. Thank you. The group meeting behavior is related to the savings. So is related to if you still do save, if you can still keep the transactions within your group. So on the group meeting behavior, we essentially ask, what do you do now in COVID? And the good news on that front was that the groups managed to find a way to continue to meet in some way, shape, or form. So mostly they met in smaller groups. What we have gotten the feedback from is, groups of 5 met, since they're anyway close together, meet at a meeting space, meet in smaller groups, or the chairman moved to smaller groups. So the overwhelming majority said no, they continued in some way, and but still, 19% stopped meeting altogether. The only some attending means that not the whole group, continued meeting in small groups, but just some members just dropped and didn't meet at all anymore. And then we've also looked at that behavior a bit split by location. And again, here comes our lessons learned as not research organization. Apologies for that. You see quite a big difference on the continuing to meet between Moyo and Yumbe. And that is between majorly also host and refugees. So the 83% that met in small groups in Yumbe is majorly BDBD and is majorly refugee groups. So from this here is an observation that at that point, April, May, there were more refugee groups who continued to meet than groups in the host community who were more likely to stop. Next slide, please. So then, as I said, the meeting usually reflects with the savings, because it's when you meet that you do the savings. So the next important question for us was, do you still save? Have the savings changed? And then was that the majority, again, quite good news, would still save. They would, however, save less. And you see that only a minority saved the same amount. And again, here came into the group who stopped meeting, also stopped saving. And again, you see what reflected from the previous slide when you look at the comparison between Moyo and Yumbe, is that for us an observation is that more refugee groups in Bidi kept on saving even if it was less than before, and more hosts were likely to stop. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of future, you know, how we were still back then, April, May, in the midst of lockdown, but you know, what would the group think would happen? And encouraging for us, at least the intention was more than half to continue to meet in small groups, continue to save. But still there was a quite big group, the 28%, who thought they would probably stop because it's not very likely that they can go on. Savings obviously are going to decrease, and the farming answer was one that we didn't expect in the survey. It came up that meant they're going to change activity. So during the lockdown, as you know, especially activities in shops around non-food items were banned. So we saw a shift to, let's say, agriculture and food of those groups and within the group. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just allow me a few thoughts. What we are seeing from this is that you know, savings groups have proven to be quite resilient compared to our other loans in the rest of the country. So also to, you know, Ugandans across Uganda in all regions during COVID, where they really were hit with repayments. The savings groups and the both refugee and hosted West Nile were pretty resilient and had at times during April, May, June, higher repayment percentages than other products. So, you know, they kept repaying and kept meeting. So for us, this is also a proof that is a really good tool. They're reaching the savings groups now to reach vulnerable rural communities. And in terms of resilience and bouncing back, where we are now, so July, August, our disbursements have increased again. So there is need for cash. It already came back. You know, the investments have already started. So very positive for us, obviously, that groups have come back and want to start investing again. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks a lot for those thoughts. Thank you, team. Thank you, project implementing partners. We're now coming to the final bit of our webinar. We are moving into the Q&A session. The Q&A, some questions have been addressed in the Q&A section. Some will have our technical team members respond to directly. So we are going to have a very quick poll before we move into the Q&A section, where you're going to give us your thoughts and your feedback on what was shared in the webinar. Great, so if you could please take the next 30 seconds or so to just give us some of your views about how satisfied you are by the content that we've just shared with you, and we'll move on to the Q&A section. Okay. Great, thanks a lot for the feedback. Of course, we are always willing to take in any more insights, any additional feedback that you have after this webinar. So we'll kindly ask you to send any thoughts or feedback to communications@fsduganda.or.ug. And now quickly moving into the Q&A. The first question came from Ambrose Ogwang, who asked, what informed the selection of Nachibale, Bidibidi, and Kampala, and not other refugee settlements? So I'll ask Anne Gashoka of BFA to address that question. Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Diana. That's a great question. So what informed the selection of those areas is because of the implementing partners that you're working with. For example, Equity and Nathan has represented them. They do a lot of cash transfers within Nakivale and also for some of the refugees in Kampala. And when we come to the Bidibidi and Palorinya, RUFI is working more closely in Bidibidi, and in Palorinya, VisionFund is doing a lot of work there, as Martina has also presented their work. So that's what informed the decision in terms of going to those settlement camps. Thank you.
Great, and we have another question that's coming for Marian Zahari. Anne, I think this would also be addressed by yourself, and Michelle can add any additional responses she would want to. How did the refugees purchase their phones, and what types of identification were required to register for their SIM cards?
Great, that's also a wonderful question. So first of all, that's a question that we did not have in our questionnaire, but we had gone into the settlement camps and conducted qualitative interviews with some of these refugees. So what came out overall is they were purchasing the cell phones within the settlement areas. I'll give an example, like in Nakivale settlement camp, there are so many businesses like which are selling electronics. They sell phones, they sell SIM cards, they sell solar systems. So I would imagine that's where they would go to. And for Kampala, of course, they are within the city. They'll go to the shops and buy the cell phones from them there. On the second part of the SIM cards, initially, I think, like the Ugandan telecommunication, body, I think, would allow the refugees to use their family attestation cards and also the refugee ID when it came to registration. But what we had that changed when there was an introduction of a ban. So that also has affected refugees in a way, because most of them also shared with us that some of their SIM cards were blocked. I think in one of the slides when we were showcasing, some of them said they had actually lost money that they had saved, like a balance in their mobile money wallet. And this was a result of the ban that had taken effect.
And maybe just to add, some refugees also mentioned to us that they used other refugees' ID to register for it, so not their personal one. So if they have a friend who has the refugee ID, will use it to register the SIM card. And that actually created a problem when they were told to come and validate their phone numbers. They were not able to do that because either the person who registered for them had left the settlement camp or is far away, then became a problem. And some of them also lost money during that part.
Thank you, Anne. Michelle. Michelle, since we have you on, maybe you can also shed a bit of light to the next question that has come from Yedesa Terga. What process, when we were doing our research, was followed to identify the study samples?
So we did random sampling, identifying individuals and households. So initially we actually got the permits from OPM, went around, found out which people are in the camp, then kind of mix different nationalities so that we're able to get a mix, especially like in Nakivale where there are more than 2 nationalities from refugees. And then in the household, we used a Kish grid to identify the adult to identify. So it was pure random to make sure that we actually get answers from it. And I guess you can find also more, we've talked about how we sampled in the report. So if you also read the report, you can find more about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. So maybe Michelle and Anne, you can both also maybe do a quick comment on how representative our sample size was across the different camps where we conducted the research.
Oh yeah, the sample size, yeah, is not actually representative because of the limited time we had to do the survey. We did the survey in January, so we selected at least to get a mix of different people, and also because of budget issues, that was also a challenge. But the reason why we did this survey was, I think 2 years back as BFA, we wanted to look at data in Uganda, and we searched far and wide to find out any information in terms of how much money are they earning, how much money are they spending on expenses, and we could not find out. So when we got this opportunity to just go and have an indicator of how much are refugees earning, we felt like this was actually more important to understand and help people to know exactly how to do that. And especially for financial institutions, this will be useful information for them to start planning products to actually support refugees, because the key question we always had was, where are refugees getting money? Because we always thought that refugees were getting just in-kind aid. So the aim also for this research is to find out, yeah, do refugees have money, and what are their sources of income?
Great, thanks a lot for that, Michelle. We're looking at about 2 more minutes on the call, and we have one final question that's coming from John, which I'm hoping that either David or Korea or both could respond to. And he's specifically talking about the role that NGOs, humanitarian focused NGOs, can play in extending these benefits to wider groups. And I think the main concern is right now a lot of these organizations are focusing on immediate health responses in response to requests from their donors. So how do you envision them playing an active role in extending these benefits? And maybe I think also, I don't know if one of you would want to say a quick word to the financial service providers, both traditional and non-traditional, who have joined today's call on the role that they could potentially play in extending these benefits. Kuria, David, over to you.
Sure, thank you for that, Diana. Yeah, so we began this entire intervention with a very Catholic view of the players in the space, both the private sector and the NGO space. We definitely see the NGOs, development actors playing a very crucial role in terms of like providing emergency relief and support to these entities. We also, one way by which we feel they can provide great values is really what they are currently doing by trying to catalyze a lot of these partnerships, right? Because truth be told, there's a lot of hesitation and there's a bit of a doubt about the viability of the refugee and the host population. We saw this several years back, and we know that this is gradually waning. But if we can get a lot of NGOs and development actors to partner with us to basically test a lot of these models out there to prove that this segment is indeed economically viable, that would be great. It's not just, it would be great if that is not just the role of maybe the private sector. I think the NGO can really take a strong lead there in helping to de-risk and partner with the existing financial institutions.
Thank you, David. Korea, did you have anything that you wanted to add about the unique role different actors, including humanitarian-focused NGOs, can play in ensuring the success of access to financial products and services for refugees?
Yeah, so yes, I wanted just to quickly add that I think there's quite a big role that everybody can play. We are kind of bringing the financial sector into this refugee environment, but there are many other needs beyond financial needs that I believe humanitarian actors could as well come up with ideas on how best to address them. Issues ranging from access to clean water, health services, but also looking at some of the other needs that the refugees have that only probably humanitarian actors could very well address. But kind of already having the financial service providers there gives us the rails or the leverage that there's infrastructure that they could rely on eventually when they come, in case they want to support these communities in one way or the other. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Korea. We are now exactly at 4:30 East Africa time. Sorry, we ran a bit over by 2 minutes. And we have received quite a few administrative requests in the Q&A section, including sharing a bit more information, such as the questionnaires as an annex to the report, which we will consider. And we've got a few requests to resend the report. Kindly remember to send an email to communications@fsduganda.or.ug if you did not get the report. You can also access the baseline report on the FSD Africa, FSD Uganda, and BFA Global websites. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We look forward to reaching out to you in future and having an ongoing conversation that focuses around the roles that different market actors can play in extending financial services to such unserved or underserved groups.